In early April, I took my family to southern Texas to watch the total solar eclipse, and we did actually get to see most of it, despite the thin layer of clouds. But this isn't a video about astronomical phenomena. I run a channel about trains and transit, so for this video, we chose to travel by airplane, because until this train begins operation, getting to San Antonio from Salt Lake City by Amtrak takes 66 hours, and getting to Houston isn't even possible based on Amtrak's website. But never fear, there will be trains at the end of this video. Texas was an amazing place. We saw new trains, old rockets, new rockets, the actual Rio Grande River, the beach, and of course, miles and miles and miles of freeways. In all my travels, I have never seen such built-out roadway infrastructure. Not even the network of elevated urban freeways in Shanghai can compare. Frontage roads, toll lanes, spaghetti bowl interchanges, deep cuts, elevated sections, double-stack freeway decks, they really do have it all. Often multiple solutions are used at the same time. It must be incredibly fun to design all these ramps without standards, rules, or even common sense, because while these creations are visually impressive, there wasn't a single time we got on the freeway when we didn't run into at least one major slowdown in traffic. This was true of all three major cities we visited: Houston, San Antonio, and Corpus Christi. Even our day trip to Brownsville got delayed. And these delays represent a big problem, because in order to get around anywhere in Texas, you generally have no other choice than buying or renting a car and fighting traffic. In other cities I visited, arriving by airplane is followed by a connection to public transit, some more convenient than others, and a direct ride downtown. But in Houston, we instead boarded a shuttle bus to the rental car facility, waited in line to claim our reservation, and then waited 2 more hours for the cars to finally be ready for us to drive. I understand that this last delay was a failure of the rental company, caused in part by the crowds arriving to see the eclipse. But I also have to point out that crowds are an area where public transit excels. Meanwhile, the airplane that brought us to Texas had enough time to board an entire new load of passengers and fly the 1,200 miles back to Salt Lake City by the time we were finally able to drive out from the airport. Now, in some ways, Texas isn't really to blame for its car-centric design. Most major cities in the USA that are built around density and transit were made to do so by their history and geography. Manhattan, in New York City, is on an island. San Francisco is on a peninsula. Seattle is on an isthmus, and so on. These geographical barriers forced development and transportation corridors to become compressed, which more easily lend themselves to transit and walkability. Texas consists of wide-open plains, with little in the way of barriers, which means that development spreads out in all directions with few obvious natural corridors. Let's take a moment to consider the geometry of concentric circles. A circle with a radius of 1 unit contains an area of pi, whereas a circle with a radius of 2 units contains an area of 4 pi. Subtracting out the circle in the center, the bigger ring now has an area 3 times greater than the center, and this only gets worse for each additional unit you spread out. At 6 units, the outer ring contains 10 times the area of the center circle. Now imagine that the center circle is downtown, and each ring is a sprawling suburb. You can see right away that, if residents spread out in a normal distribution, that the suburbs are going to outnumber the urban residents by a significant margin. If you are an urbanist in Texas, you are starting the game in hard mode, and you have my sympathies. Now consider that most of these cities' development occurred about the same time that highways received most of their funding, and add to that the cultural aspect that individual success in our era of history is generally defined by having your own piece of land, your own home, your own pool, and your own car, etc., and suddenly it isn't so hard to understand how we arrived at the current state of gridlock in the midst of towering, multi-level freeway interchanges. In Utah, we share a lot of the same cultural aspirations with Texas, but the good news for us is that, unlike Texas, we are geographically constrained by our mountains and our lakes, which have lined us up in a single convenient corridor called the Wasatch Front. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of Utahns live on just 10 to 20% of the state's land area, depending on how you count it, making Utah surprisingly one of the most urbanized states in the Union. we couldn't become like Texas, even if we tried. And our current crisis in housing prices show that we did indeed try. For Utah, the only way to keep growing is to add density. And the only way to make density truly livable is to build out a transportation network centered around transit and alternatives to the personal automobile. Now, I am not among those who consider the car to be pure evil. I find it to be useful and convenient in most cases. However, I am concerned that we've been spending all our money and energy on cars for far too long. A healthy city is like a healthy, balanced breakfast, with lots of variety, not just a single bowl of sugary cereal. In Salt Lake City, we have the opportunity to build a transformational piece of transit infrastructure at the Rio Grande Depot. This project would reorient the entire city away from freeway ramps and towards our historic train station, while at the same time removing a significant barrier between our east and west sides. To learn more about the Rio Grande Plan, hop on over to our website, link in the description below. The Rio Grande Plan builds on the significant amount of public transit infrastructure already in place, such as right here on Main Street. Here, TRAX trains travel down the middle of the street, separated from cars and bikes, and stop every other block to provide convenient local access to dozens of pedestrian-oriented destinations. I mentioned in the last video how OGX travel at an average speed of 13 miles per hour, making it just as slow as the infamous S-Line streetcar. Well, here on Main Street, TRAX trains travel at 10 miles per hour, making them the slowest of any scheduled service on the UTA's network. And frankly, this is how it should be. This is the densest development in any city in Utah, and people on foot are rightly the priority. It's been this way ever since TRAX first opened, 25 years ago, in December of 1999. And now, planners are talking about taking the next steps of completely pedestrianizing this space, meaning no cars at all, at least on weekends. This brings me to the trains in Houston, which, of course, I made every effort to ride. The light rail network in Houston consists of 3 routes, one going north-south and 2 running east-west on a shared corridor through downtown. This east-west corridor runs in mixed traffic right next to the curb, following the pattern set by several modern streetcar lines in other cities. These 2 branches strangely end after crossing a non-revenue bridge over the Buffalo Bayou, which I hope means they are setting up an extension to the future high-speed rail terminal. That would be nice. Trains on these lines usually consist of only 1 car and feel very much like a bus rapid transit line that has been converted to rail. This isn't the case though, as both lines are built on entirely new alignments, with average speeds of about 15 miles per hour for both branches. This is fine, because based on the concentric circles of density from earlier, they don't really have that far to travel before the last traces of urban density give way to sprawl. The north-south line is a different story altogether. Like the 2 east-west branches, this line remains in the right-of-way of surface streets for its entire length, with a few quasi-exceptions, such as this elevated station here at the Burnett Transit Center. Most impressive about this line is the frequency, with trains running every 7 minutes during peak hours, which is twice as often as UTA runs their most frequent rail service. You really can use this line without having to memorize a schedule. The average speed is 20 miles per hour outside of downtown, but within the downtown area, the average speeds drop to as low as 4 miles per hour. And again, I think this is a really good thing. Main Street in Houston has been fully pedestrianized for several blocks, including one signature portion where the rail line becomes a part of an urban fountain. The area formerly reserved for cars has been expanded into sidewalks, green space, art installations, and public areas. The choice of materials for the roadways and plaza lend themselves to a slower, more beautiful patch of the city, where people will want to congregate for meals or other events. And the tracks fit in perfectly. With all the trains crossing in front of each other, you really do feel like you are in the very center of the city's activity. As Salt Lake City works on their plans to pedestrianize Main Street, I would encourage planners here to look to Houston. Houston's light rail network may not be as ambitious or as far-reaching as UTA's, but what it does really well. It is quality over quantity, and ridership has responded accordingly. My own recommendations for Salt Lake City planners are: 1. Run a lot of trains, so that Main Street is extremely easy to access. 2. Run these trains slowly to match the pace you are trying to set for pedestrian traffic. 3. Use a mix of materials to make the built environment interesting to stay and look at. 4. Add in plants and water features to break up the straight lines and hard space. And 5. Remove cars as much as possible. Whether it is these solutions or others that are taken, I think it is important to remember why we build public spaces, public transit, or even cities at all. These spaces are for us, the people who live here. Buses, trains, parks, cars, and roads all need to be designed around the humans who call these places home. When something isn't fulfilling its design purpose, it can be updated and fixed, whether that means burying the rails or opening Main Street to be shared between trains and pedestrians. It is an exciting time for cities as we look to the future. Let's make sure we look around us as well, so that we can learn from the best examples. Are there other cities that you love that can provide good lessons for our Main Street? Let me know in the comments below. I'm Christian Lenhart. Thank you for watching.
Yeah, somewhere up there.
Woohoo!
Oh, is that it? That's it!